In this video, I'm going to be taking a look at the Polaroid Snap Touch camera. This is the follow-up to the original Polaroid Snap, which came out towards the end of 2015. And that was a basic camera with a built-in printer which used zero ink technology. And every time you took a photo, it would print out of the side of the camera. Effectively, every time you press that red button, it cost you 50 pence, because that's the price of one piece of that special zinc paper. Well, the follow-up, the Snap Touch, adds a touchscreen on the back, and with the addition of that, it means you no longer have to print out everything you take a photo of. You can be selective on that screen and only print the things that you really want to keep a hard copy of. And over the long term, compared to the original, of course, it will therefore be cheaper to run. And on a recent trip to Costco, yes, we do have them in the UK, along with Starbucks, IKEA, etc, etc. I saw this display, and they were offering the Snap Touch with a bundle for £150 or thereabouts, including VAT. And this is what you got inside the special Costco bundle. You get the camera, you get a case for the camera, which is a good idea, having that big screen on the back. You don't want to get that scratched. And we've also got some extra paper, 50 pack there, and a memory card, 16 gigabytes. It did say on the advert it was going to be 8 gigabytes, but 16, I'll take that. Now, if I bought these things separately on Amazon, it would be £24.49 for the pack of 50 pieces of that paper, £19.99 for the case, £11.99 for a 16 gig memory card, and £159.99 for the camera. So all in Amazon prices at the day I'm putting this video out, that's £216.46. So getting it all for £150 in store wasn't a bad deal, really. The camera itself, as with all these Polaroid branded devices, comes in a nice display case which looks good in a shop. But one thing that drew my eye in particular was the fact that this thing also does video, 1080p video. I thought that would be interesting to try out on this little novelty camera. On the right hand side we've got things like borders and digital filters and a built-in selfie mirror. Brilliant, just what I need. And on the side here you can see we've got a few extra accessories, including 10 extra pieces of that special zinc paper. One downside to this kind of display packaging is that removing the things from it is a destructive process. You'll never get the stuff back in there again, what little remains of that box anyway. Inside here you can also see we've got some instructions there, a very brief instruction booklet. We've also got to remove a couple of things from the camera that are there for display purposes, a pretend picture coming out of the side and that one stuck on the screen. And notice we've also got a lens cap here. I was interested to see that this thing is magnetic. I think that's quite a neat little idea. The fact that you just pop it on there. It also keeps the Polaroid logo the right way up as well. But the first thing we have to do is charge this up using the supplied USB cable. I'm plugging it into a USB power supply. You could plug it into a computer if you wanted, and I'll just wait till it charges. Returning to check on it after a couple of hours, I found it had already finished charging, so I can unplug the USB lead, put the little wrist strap on there so I don't lose it, and we'll look at the bottom of this from left to right. You can see on the left there's a sort of circular hole. That's a speaker. Then we've got the micro SD card slot, tripod screw mount, micro USB, and to the right of that a reset hole. Just putting the micro SD card that's been supplied in there in that spring-loaded slot on the bottom, and then to turn it on you press on the top here, and that also brings the flash up at the same time. So the on button is also the flash. Upon initial startup, you're greeted with various setup screens, including the language and the date and time. These can all be selected by tapping on the screen. It's a resistive touch screen, a technology which has largely fallen out of favour nowadays. Now, the paper that these cameras use is that special zinc paper, which is zero ink technology, and the paper itself has built-in dyes or inks which are activated by the print heads in the device. So there's no ink cartridge in the device, it activates these using heat. Now, there's a blue card on the bottom of there which has to go in first with every new pack, and that helps the camera to identify what kind of paper has gone into it, how many sheets I think, and whether it's adhesive backed or not. But also the blue card is a head cleaner. It pulls through the camera and cleans those heads every time you put a new pack in. Right, so I'm all ready to go. Let's take my first picture with this camera, and what better to take a picture of than a Poochie Amiibo. So there we go, that's picture number one, although I think that is a little bit too far away, too much background on that, so let's get closer. But one thing I've noticed here, it autofocuses. This camera's got an autofocus. Notice how it jumps in and out a little bit there when I press the shutter button before it takes the picture. I'm pretty impressed with that. I really thought it would be a fixed focus lens on this. Anyway, let's print that out. We can choose how many copies we want and then press print. I'm not going to have you sit here for the entire time it takes, but it's 25 seconds. I timed it, which isn't too bad because, of course, once it's finished, it's finished. It's unlike an old type of instant photo. You have to wait for it. It comes out and it's done. Although I've got to say that it's not of the highest quality, but more on that later on. Let's try the video now. I've moved it into the video mode. I'll start the recording by pressing the shutter button. We can see it starts counting up at the bottom of the screen there. I'll just create some movement on the image so that we can watch it back. And then to play it back, we can just tap the center of the screen here. We can see the video that we've just taken. So now I know how everything works. I took the camera out and about around Liverpool and I've taken some photos and videos. So let me show you some of those now. The marketing for this camera suggests it's really supposed to be taken as a bit of fun, just something to play around with, maybe to give to a child or a young teenager to take some snaps with, not something that's supposed to take on a DSLR in image quality. It is supposed to be 13 megapixels, and that's a resolution of 4224 by 3168. I'm not too sure whether it's going to be that full resolution. I think it's more likely to be a lower res image that's stretched out to that. When you zoom in a bit, it does look a little bit soft for a 13 megapixel image. The camera does have a built-in digital zoom. Of course, it's not an optical one, which means that you'll reduce the image quality down if you decide to use it, so probably best avoided. It also has some issues with light and dark. When things get a little bit too contrasty in a scene, it tends to make them a little bit dark. It does have an HDR mode, but it doesn't do an awful lot, at least in my tests anyway. It was hard to notice a difference between it being on or off. The camera also seems to have a little bit of an issue with colours. You can see here the reds are popping a little bit. It's a bit too bright on some of these. Of course, you could correct things like this in software, but it's not really that kind of camera. You can see here that's pretty garish. Now, when you go indoors, you get a bit of a yellowy, greeny tint to proceedings. Now, there are settings in the camera to adjust it for different lighting conditions, but this really is the kind of camera that you'd leave on auto more often than not. It does tend to make things a little bit yellowy. However, the autofocus is definitely working. As you can see here, I've got the chap at the front in focus and the chap at the back out of focus and vice versa. And the flash definitely works. This is a scene without the flash, and then this is with the flash turned on, and then this is a scene with the flash, and then this is what it looks like with no flash. So the photo's a bit of a mixed bag. The video, different story. It doesn't have built-in stabilization, as you can see here. You wouldn't be expecting that in a camera like this. The autofocus does work whilst you're using the camera. As you can see here, it's focused on that bollard and now it's focusing in the distance, but notice it just keeps refocusing. It doesn't grab a focal point and stick to it. It's jumping in and out all the time, and you might think, well, that's just that scene, but if I showed this one here, there's nothing for it to get confused by. And notice how the focus just keeps popping in and out all the time. It's never quite getting it right, and you can't get a much more simple scene than that. You've just got stuff miles away. I mean, what's it trying to focus on other than infinite distance? It's not quite getting that right. And unfortunately, as there's no way to lock off the focusing, it's going to continue doing this all the time you're taking video, and in my opinion it makes the video unwatchable, and therefore in turn makes the video mode not worth using. Okay, let's just go a little bit more in depth on the camera. The first thing I want to talk about is that on-off button. I'm not convinced with that system of switching a camera on and off. It feels a little bit flimsy, and sometimes it doesn't quite engage properly. I can imagine that breaking over time. Now, in the top of there is the flash, and to the right of that, the little round silver thing, that is the selfie mirror. If you can see yourself in that, you're doing pretty well. And below that is the autofocus lamp. Now, this lens cap, the magnetic lens cap I mentioned earlier on, I thought that was quite a neat idea, and I still do. However, if you slip it into a pocket, make sure you keep it away from anything that doesn't like having magnets next to it. And you might have noticed the wind noise that was prevalent on the clips I just demonstrated, and that's because the microphone is just below the lens on the front of the camera. But as we decided we're not going to be using the video mode, maybe that's not such a big issue. One thing that is a big issue though is the reflective nature of that screen. It is the most reflective screen that I've ever seen on a camera. For the vast majority of the time I was outside using this, the only thing I could see on that screen was my own stupid face looking back at me. The operation of the camera is not the quickest. After you've taken a picture, it will display it on screen for a couple of seconds before it lets you take another one. In addition, when you press the shutter button, it does the focusing afterwards. So sometimes you'll press the button and it'll take a picture immediately. Other times it takes about half a second to focus and then takes the picture, which can catch you out. Quite often you end up taking a picture of the floor or something. Now I'll show you some of the on-screen menus. To change between the photo or video mode, you just tap the relevant icon on screen. As you can see now, we're in the video mode. Video is also available in different resolutions, 1080p, 720p or VGA. Now back to the photo mode, we've got some additional options here in the middle. That's where the HDR on and off is, as well as the flash, which you can have as automatic or permanently on. Then if you go towards the bottom of there, that icon at the bottom is the one for the self timer, which is either a 3-second or a 10-second countdown. There's also a photo option here where you can take multiple exposures and make them into one image, either 2, 3 or 4 exposures. The 3 are in vertical panels like this, and as you can see here, I've taken 3 individual pictures which combine into one, but also they're stored on the memory card as 3 separate photos, and you can print them out as individuals or as a combined image. And of course you've got options to delete the images in the camera menus themselves. You can look back through the previous photos and videos you've taken on the camera's screen, and if you wanted to, you could choose to print the photos from here, or you can edit them by doing things such as adding borders or filters or putting stickers on the top. There's only a limited selection here, but you can put them anywhere you want on the picture, at whatever size you want, and rotate them as well if you're into that kind of thing. And one good thing about that is that they're not destructive to the original image. It saves it as a new image on the camera and also retains the original image without the sticker on it. And the same goes for any images that you rotate or crop in on. If you save those, they're saved as additional stills on the memory card alongside the untouched originals. And then of course you can choose which one you want to print out on that expensive zinc paper. Now there are some additional settings in the camera. There's nothing too unusual here, but one of the ones I thought might have come in handy was the one to adjust for different lighting conditions, especially when I was indoors and the pictures came out a little bit greeny. I perhaps could have adjusted that for incandescent or fluorescent light. However, when you're out and about, the screen on the back of the camera doesn't give a good representation of the image quality anyway, so it's hard to know whether or not you'd be improving anything until you got back home and put the image on a computer. I've stuck one of the photos to a piece of white photo card here to give you a reference point for true white. We can see the colours here are just a little bit off, a bit subdued. If we compare them to the original photo, you can see especially there the difference. I've never been too happy with this zinc technology. It's never worked perfectly for me. It's always been a little bit off. You can adjust the settings for the printer in the camera, and you can adjust the brightness. And the next photos you're going to see, the one on the right, I've adjusted the brightness to the maximum, and you can see that right one is a little bit whiter than the other one, but still it's a grey background when really it was a perfect white. I should mention that there's also an option in here to get the camera to automatically print out every single time you press that shutter button, so it acts just like a traditional Polaroid instant camera. Now you can also connect the camera up to an app which is available for iOS or Android, and that works in 2 different directions. You can get a picture off your phone, and then you can get your phone to send that to the camera and therefore use the camera basically just as a printer. You can see here the sharpness of this zinc technology. The colours might not be perfect, but it is nice and sharp. Also in the app you can add filters and backgrounds and stamps and all sorts of things. You can even put marks on the images themselves. You can also send the images back from the camera and upload them into your smartphone, and you can see here the amount of detail in those images. Now for the really bad news. This camera froze on me. Not once, but twice. It locked up while I was going through the menus and options while I was shooting those parts for this video. It didn't happen while I was out and about taking photos and video, just while I was going through the different options. But it happened twice, which means it's not an isolated incident. The only way to get the camera to turn off was to put a bent paper clip in that reset hole. This was happening on the latest firmware. When I got the camera, I downloaded the latest firmware via the app in the phone, which updated the camera automatically, and the firmware I was using is the version you see at the top of the screen there. So they've definitely got an issue there they need to resolve, because looking in the Amazon comments, it seems that other people have had the same problem. I've been on a bit of a journey with this camera. I initially started off by thinking I'd got a good deal on a novelty camera, and then I was pleasantly surprised to find that it had an autofocus lens and the ability to take 1080p 30 video. But then I was let down by the quality of that video with its constant refocusing issues, as well as the problem with the reflective screen on the back of the camera making it hard to use outdoors, as well as the quality of the printouts that the camera produced. And then the final nail in the coffin was the fact that the camera locked up for me not once but twice, and I had to reset it with a paperclip. So this isn't one I think I can recommend. If you want to pick one of these up, the best deal at the time I'm putting this video out is at the Costco stores in the UK, perhaps in other countries as well. I've also got some links to Amazon in the video description, but I really do think they need to do a couple of things with the firmware before this one is really ready for its close-up. Anyway, that's it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching.